My name is Boogie Black, and I'm coming to you from Honolulu, Hawaii. So I'm a little bit later on the time frame than you are. I assume all of you are in California. But anyway, welcome. Just want to kick things off by reminding everybody that Chuck Jones Center for Creativity is a free service, and we appreciate donations in any amount and from anybody that can be made to chuckjones.org. So the chuckjones.org website will receive donations, and that allows instructors like myself and technicians like Scott and administrators like Robert Patrick and others to bring these all to you. So make a contribution, invite your friends. We always like to have more attendance than less. And with that, guys, we're into our last class for the month of July. The month of July has been dedicated to an area of animation that is highly specialized, and it's an area called broadcast graphics. It's all of the graphics that are used to brand either a broadcast network or a specific channel, or as of late, a streaming service like Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and then of course all of the channels that now have services such as HBO Max and others like that. All of them need to be able to create an identity on air, meaning during the streaming, so that you know who all this great programming is brought to you by. And ultimately, as those services and those channels gain more viewership, they're able to sell their advertising for more because they have more eyeballs on their network. So networks always like to brand themselves so that, first of all, they can get a larger audience, and second of all, so that they can also get advertisers to advertise on their service. So with that, we've spent the last 3 weeks, and we'll be spending today talking specifically about that area of graphic design and animation called broadcast graphics. Today, we're going to specialize in the area of color storyboarding and also what we call motion tests. Motion tests are very quick, rough form animations that allow a director and a designer like myself to be able to see how the motion is after we've storyboarded it. So in other words, we'll go to an animator, say, listen, quickly make these models in the computer, and then I want you to animate them per the storyboard, and I want to take a look at the motion and then be able to revise that motion based on what I see in the motion test. Motion tests are usually what we call low res, meaning that they can quickly be rendered by the computer and then outputted so that we can watch them. However, they don't include all of the beautiful visuals that are required, such as the color, the lighting, the shading, the drop shadows, and all of what you're probably come to know in your video game language, what we call ray tracing. Ray tracing is the ability of the computer to literally trace a single speck or pixel of light as it goes through a three-dimensional environment, and then be able to calculate how that light affects everything that it hits. It's a very, very interesting and ultimately becomes a very realistic way to create computer animation of something that actually doesn't exist as a physical object, yet looks like a literal physical object. That's an area of computer animation called ray tracing. Ray tracing. Highly, highly computational heavy, meaning that it takes some very powerful computers to render that. Okay, so with that, I'm going to get started on today's class. First of all, does anybody have any questions? If you have any questions, feel free to drop in anytime during this presentation, and I'll go ahead and answer your questions and we can move on. So feel free to chime in anytime. Either raise your hand via via the server, or sorry, via the Zoom service, or literally just unmute yourself and say, Boogie, I've got a question. All right. Okay, with that, I'm going to have Scott bring up our first images. In particular, this is going to be an image that from previous classes, you've seen me talk about quite a bit. And the reason I've concentrated on this particular project, which is a project for ESPN, Exclusive Sports Network. And this was an opening animation for a title, meaning the main title of a show called Baseball Tonight, ESPN's Baseball Tonight. And what they wanted was approximately a 30-second animation that told, in just 30 seconds, told the story of baseball. And as you recall, I came up with this concept of dividing baseball up into 3 main chapters or main segments called the pitch, the hit, and the play. And basically, by telling that story in roughly 30 seconds, people got a general understanding of what went on in a baseball game. It's basically broken into those 3 segments. So I started with the concept drawings, which involve perspective drawing and typography, as well as imagery. And you can see that all this is done in pencil and is done in black and white, simply to convey quick concepts to the ESPN team to get them to approve of a particular design direction that I would like to go. Luckily, they like these images very much. So they asked me to take these images and basically storyboard in black and white pencil the entire open 30 seconds of animation and all of the main segments of that. And if we can advance on, Scott, you'll see the storyboard here. So this is the black and white storyboard for ESPN Tonight. It's going to be approximately 30 seconds long. And you can see here that it starts with the Major League Baseball logo. Because all of the games that were played on ESPN Baseball Tonight were Major League Baseball games. So we start with that. And then we go into what I came to know as a book, a conceptual book on the story called Baseball. So the book opens to the left. It opens up to the first chapter, which is the pitch. And then it turns a page to the second chapter, which is the hit. And then it turns a page to the third chapter, which is the play. And then finally, the book resolves itself by closing down, and you see the back cover that says ESPN Baseball Tonight. And you can see that story in the storyboard here. So this is a 16-frame storyboard resulting in a 30-second animation. And you can see basically how that animation worked out. So what I'm going to have Scott do is Scott's going to play. Scott, I'm going to ask you if you can do this. Can you advance my demo reel to the very end piece, the last piece of the demo reel, and play that for the students? And guys, pay attention to this because it'll have relevance to everything that we're going to talk about next. So watch this piece so you can see the animation. Great, thank you, Scott. You can go ahead and keep that queued up because we'll refer to this piece as I advance a little bit further on. So if you could cue that up to the beginning of the ESPN piece again, I'd appreciate it. So guys, once we have the black and white storyboard completed in pencil, it's time for them to ask the question, okay, I get the motion, I get what's going to happen in your story, Boogie, but what does it actually look like in color? And when that question is asked, what I typically do and what I would recommend you do is you pick 2 frames out of your storyboard. In this case, I'm gonna pick out the last frame because that's the branding frame. So the last frame of the storyboard, I'm going to do in color, and also I'm going to do one of the middle frames, which happens to be frame 3. Okay, so frame 3 and the last frame 16 are the 2 frames that I'm going to pull out of that storyboard, and I'm going to explore color with that. And the way that I explore color is I do color renderings, color drawings. When I did this storyboard, I did it by hand, and I did it in traditional forms of ink and paint, and also Prismacolor. Prismacolor being the colored pencils. So before we move on, Scott, I wanted to introduce the students to some of the equipment that I would need in order to do these. So if you could switch to my down shooter, I would appreciate it. Okay, guys, this is for later, this specific shot. Let me see if I can get my camera. Yeah, but one of the things I want to do is I want to introduce you guys to some things. First of all, always a good idea to have what's called a Pantone color book. It's a swatch book like this. And the nice thing is that this basically does the entire color spectrum in little swatch form, which allows you to basically pick out any color. I could go in here and say, I want to get into the green family. So I would quickly pull out the green and have that available as a selected color, like that. Then I would say, you know something, I want something in the yellow family too. So I'll pull something out in the yellow family like that. And then I've got easy access to colors that are of interest to me. And that's all done through a book called the Pantone color swatch book. These are not cheap. These are expensive. They're probably about 50 bucks to get one. But the nice thing is you buy one and you hold on to it forever. And it's a very good book because all printers of, let's say, T-shirts or business cards or brochures all refer to these Pantone colors by numbers, specific numbers that go to each color here. So you can call out colors to a printer. You can say, use Pantone 241, please, for the yellow, and use Pantone 561 for the turquoise color, okay? So good thing to have when dealing with color. Pantone color swatch book right here. Second thing you need, very good set of colored pencils, okay? This is a set done by Barrel that's called Prismacolor. It's kind of the standard, the industry standard for colored pencils. It's got a really nicely designed packaging here. Watch how this color thing opens up. I slide the panel up, I flip it back, and then I push it back up again, and it becomes a set of pencils that can lie on your table like that. And that's called a Prismacolor set of colored pencils. I believe in this set, there's probably about 100, maybe 150 different colors. This becomes very, very handy. And like I say, it's done by Barrel. Barrel is the manufacturer. The pencils are called Prismacolor pencils, okay? I'm gonna leave those open because I'm gonna use them. And then the next thing to have is always your trusty triangle, preferably a clear one that you could see through. That's so that you can draw nice straight edges with your pencils. And then of course you want to have your colored pencil, of which you'll have your set of Prismacolors across the entire spectrum, and you'll have a handy eraser. That's really, really important to have, okay? Also, because we now offer beautiful software programs like Photoshop, where you can do a lot of this drawing in the computer. You don't even need to draw it on paper. You can draw it on paper and you can colorize it. Sorry, you can colorize it in the computer using Photoshop, okay? But when I was doing these, you have a second option. It's more traditional, and it's called an airbrush. Have you guys ever heard of an airbrush? Who's ever heard of an airbrush? Raise your hand. Okay, very good. At least we have a couple takers. So an airbrush is hooked up to compressed air. And this hose with this connector, okay, connects to a tank of compressed air, or an air compressor that basically has a little motor on it, and the motor starts whenever the air pressure gets down. This end of this hose is connected to what's called an airbrush. And an airbrush is this tool right here. This tool is an incredibly helpful tool for drawing, okay? The airbrush has what's called a needle. The needle is right here. And I can pull this needle out, and as you can see, it is very, very sharp. As sharp as a sewing needle. And that fits into the rest of the airbrush like so, and controls the amount of paint that comes out of this end here. And you control that by pressing this button right here. So you press down for pressure, air pressure, and then you pull back to allow for the color to come through. So down for air pressure, back to allow the paint to come through the other end here, okay? Now, airbrushes are a very specific tool that gives you perfect, beautiful gradations of color, but they do get clogged, so you have to keep it very, very clean, okay? So you constantly have to have a little cup of water next to you, and you want to be able to always be cleaning your needle and then putting your needle back into your airbrush and then spraying away. This little container right here is what holds your different paints. So you put your paints in here, and then you attach the paint to your airbrush, right like this, okay? And then you have a tool here where you can apply pressure, air pressure, and then apply paint by pulling it back. And the paint comes out of this little container where you've mixed your colors. And you mix your colors with a specific type of paint. This paint is called, designer gouache. Gouache is the name of the color. It's not acrylic, it's not oil, it's gouache. And gouache is a very, very finely ground color element, and it's really, really good for airbrushing. One of the best. And the other thing that's nice about it is it gives you a matte finish rather than a glossy finish. Gives you a matte finish so that you can come back and use pencil over it. Whereas if you use acrylic, acrylic is kind of a plastic finish. And as a result, it doesn't take pencil very well. Whereas gouache takes pencil very, very well. So my recommendation, if you ever airbrush and are planning to do storyboards, always use gouache as your base paint, and then you can use your Prismacolor pencils over it, all right? So with that, the last thing you're gonna need is a good series of brushes, okay? A good series of artistic brushes here with different widths and different bristles on the end of them, okay? This one here is what's called a toothbrush. Anybody who hasn't heard of a toothbrush, please raise your hand. Who has not heard of a toothbrush? Okay, I'm glad to hear everybody knows what a toothbrush is. So a toothbrush is used to put the bristle end into some paint and then flick it like this to create a splatter of paint, which I used a lot in the storyboard that I'm going to show you in a minute. And it creates a background that has a speckled texture, which would be very hard to get without having a technique of a toothbrush, okay, and some paint that I can splatter onto the frames, all right? Okay, with that, we're gonna take a look at some of these storyboards. Let me put all these things away. Okay, so let's look at the keyframes that are now on your screen. As you can see in the background, Okay, first of all, I've worked on a black surface rather than a white surface. It's always easier to make things lighter and brighter on a black surface than they are on a white surface, because white is already very, very light and very hard to make lighter. Whereas if you start with black and you build up color and paint, everything is getting lighter on top of a black background. So we always work in black paper when dealing with color keyframes, all right? So as you can see in the frame on the left, you see that splattered background? I use that splatter background with a combination of light colored paint and dark colored paint over an airbrushed gradation. And that creates a splatter texture that I did with the toothbrush. So before I drew the ball and the guy and all of the rectangular forms in that frame, I first of all laid down my background that included that splatter texture that I did with the toothbrush, okay? So after I've gone ahead and drawn up these frames with a combination of airbrushing and Prismacolor pencil, I show these to the ESPN team and they go, great, that color looks fantastic. The frames look great. Now I want you to storyboard the entire story in color. Okay, that requires me doing 16 frames with very tight drawings like this. Okay, so Scott, if you could advance on. Here's an example of what the storyboard looked like in full color. So you can see I went from the pencil drawing to the color drawings here. And now the ESPN team knows exactly what this animation is going to look like and what the story is that I'm trying to tell, okay? So now they're feeling very, very good about things. This is actually looking quite good to them. So as a result, I can now go on to animating. So now that you've seen the black and white storyboard, the color keyframes, and now the full color storyboard, I want you to watch the animation again. And notice how close my color storyboard ends up looking to the actual animation. Take a look. So there's an example of seeing the storyboard. See the storyboard after it? That animator knew exactly what the story was I was trying to tell and what the look and feel of the piece was supposed to be. This is very, very important because we're talking about a lot of money in order to make this animation. A lot of money. And people do not want to invest a lot of money in something that they don't know exactly what it's going to look like. So your color storyboard, your black and white concept drawings, your black and white storyboard, and your color keyframes all add up to a very satisfying experience, but also one that the client felt very confident they knew exactly what they were getting when you started the process, okay? So with that, I'm going to show you a couple of other quick storyboards and keyframes that show you some other examples beyond ESPN. So Scott, if you could advance. Here's one for a program called Festival. And you can see some of the animation in there. It's going to be what we call a multi-plane. The word festival is going to be on several different planes in three-dimensional space, and it's going to be moving back and forth. Okay, and then it's going to resolve to the festival logo itself. Okay, go ahead and advance on to the next one, Scott. Here's an example of a local television station called Channel 5 WNEW, which is out of, I believe it's out of Washington, D.C. You can see here, I got several different treatments of what the color could look like, but look at the storyboard down on the very bottom. That storyboard shows how the motion of the number 5 logo is going to animate over time. You can see it down in the bottom. It's going to start on edge looking at the very bottom of the number 5. And then that 5 is going to flip up to the camera so that you can see it straight on and understand that it's the number 5. Okay. So with that, we have color storyboarding kind of behind us. Okay. The next thing that we want to work on is we now have a very good color storyboard. We have an understanding of the story I'm trying to tell. We have overall timings, meaning the piece is going to be about 30 seconds long. And then what we want to get into is doing what we call motion testing, sometimes just referred to the 2 initials MT, okay, or motion test. That's what it stands for. In motion testing, I'm going to ask my animator, my computer animator, to build some quick models that are going to be just lines that outline the form of something, like let's say the word shopping or the word entertainment. He'll quickly make that just as lines in the computer, and then I'll ask him to animate it via the storyboard. I'm going to show you an example from something that I did for AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph. And this is an example of a wireframe animation, very early animation done in the computer that allows me to study not the color and not the texture and not the lighting, but rather just the motion itself. So Scott, could you play the AT&T wireframe movie for me? So there you go, guys. Scott has it on a loop. You can keep looping it, Scott. And what you can see here is that none of those shapes have any color or opacity to them. It's just outlines. We call this wireframing, wireframe animation. It's just giving me an understanding of what the motion is going to look like, not what the colors are going to be, or what the lighting is going to be, or what the texture on these objects is. It's just simply allowing me to study the animation and see if it's an animation that I like. If I don't like it, I'm going to ask the animator, slow down at this part right here, speed up at this part. Rather than turning to the left, turn to the right. And let's move the camera around these objects and find the motion that works best per the storyboard, okay? So this is a part of the process of animating in the computer that is called wireframing. Wireframe animation, okay? And this animation results in a collection of what we call motion tests, sometimes referred to as MT, motion tests. And from the motion tests, we can go, nice, the motion is starting to look pretty good. Let's go ahead and start to put some shading in. So with that, Scott, let's stop here. And let's move on to another project that I worked on called Tivo. If any of you guys have ever heard of Tivo, I did some animation for them. And the nice thing is that I started the process just along the lines that you just talked. I started with a concept sketch, started with a storyboard in black and white pencil, then I went to color, then I went to motion test. And what you're going to see next is what we call a quick shade. In other words, rather than them being wireframes, we're going to ask them to quickly fill the objects with just a gray color, just something that allows us to not see through the objects, but rather to see them as opaque objects, okay? So let's go ahead and play the first Tivo scene. So here's an example of the Tivo character with a lot of squash and stretch. You can see that comes down, hits the button, he squashes so flat he almost touches the sides, and then jumps towards the camera. And as you can see, it's very crude. There's no sort of, right texture or lighting, but rather it's just what we call a quick shade. So the animator took my wireframes And then he basically put some texture, just some quick basic texture onto the object and made them opaque rather than transparent, okay? Let's move on to the next one. Here's another one. You can see that what we call the polygons, the flat surfaces, are not smooth yet, but rather they're just crude shapes. And this can be rendered very, very quickly by the computer. The computer can render this very quickly and I can study the motion. I'm not worried about the texture of the object, the color of the object, the character necessarily. I'm more just studying the motion right now. This is another example of a classic motion test that I'll get from the animator. You can see down in the lower left corner, he's got an X, Y, Z axis. That's the axis of the camera. So the camera is slightly moving, okay, from right to left. Okay, and you can see that motion in the X, Y, Z coordinates down in the lower left-hand corner. Let's go on to the next one. This is a little bit later where we've started to put a couple of the scenes together. So we have Tivo, first of all, jumping on the button and then swinging up to the siphon or the funnel, and then finally coming down and onto the ramp. So let's go ahead and play that again. So these are what are called crude motion tests. We call them quick shades. They're just simply put into, just put some quick color on there just to make the objects opaque. Okay, and Scott, let's move on to the next one. Now we're starting to get some of the true color of the piece starting to come in here. So we're starting to think about, we took the motion that we had in wireframe and then finally in quick shade. And now we're starting to actually put some color onto the objects itself. So now you're starting to see what's called a smooth shade. A smooth shade is where we add what's called anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing makes all those curved surfaces more rounded rather than faceted like they were before, okay? And you can start to see that the piece is starting to get closer and closer to what it ultimately is going to look like. And then Scott, could we see the last piece in this collection? This is a series of interstitial. You can see here, guys, we've got a combination of both rough shaded stuff and also kind of nicely rendered stuff that ultimately will look like it's supposed to look, like that one there. And this one here, this is pretty close to final there. This one is very close to final also, but this one is quite a ways away from final. It's still crude. The background isn't in, the lighting is too harsh. But the nice thing is that you can see the general process as we go from storyboard all the way to motion tests here. All right, let's stop there. Okay, Scott, we can go ahead and show, what I want to show you next, guys, is not all animation involves three-dimensional graphics, meaning they don't have to turn on edge like this. They can be flat to camera, but you get the sense that the environment is deep by planing things over each other. So some things are in the foreground and some things are in the background, okay? And then they move past each other like this, okay? But objects are actually flat to the camera. So with that, Scott, let's show the next piece. So you get the sense that this space is deep. It's deep in space, but actually it's just objects that are facing the camera and moving left to right. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So these are all different intros into areas of the web TV service. So one of them was based on weather. The previous one was based on entertainment or news. And the next one is based on sports. Go ahead and play the next one. So basically the same animation, just different background objects and different typography. So rather than it saying instant news, it says instant sports. Rather than saying instant sports, it says instant news. And it might say instant weather as an example, or instant business. Okay? All right. So let's hold off there, Scott. You can cut back to me. So what I'm going to show you guys very quickly, because we've got about, let's see, about 20 minutes. I'm just going to introduce you to the idea of dealing with color storyboards. So with that, Scott, let's cut to the down shooter. Oh, let's see if I got it up and running. Oh, believe it or not, we're going to change the criteria for today's lesson because unfortunately my camera has run out of battery, so I can't get it shooting down on it. But I'm going to quickly draw, and I'm going to show you guys what I'm going to use. So the first thing that I'm going to do is show you what my storyboard frames look like, because they're on black paper rather than, they look like this. This is what the frames look like, guys. Okay, I've now made the outline of my 3-frame storyboard, okay, with white on black rather than black on white. Okay, that's because it's always easier to make things in color lighter than make them darker. Okay, so with that, I'm going to quickly lay down some background color. And to do that, I'm going to use a Prismacolor pencil like this. I'm going to lay down a light blue background in the first frame. So I'm just going to lay it down by drawing hard in one corner and very lightly up to the other corner, creating a gradated background. Now, one thing when dealing with storyboards in color is that darker things that are darker tend to recede. They tend to be more in the background if it's darker. Lighter things tend to come forward. They tend to accede. They come up closer to the camera. So if you want something to be really close to the camera, it's ideally that you color that lightly so that it senses that it's closer to the camera. Objects that are more distant or sides that are more distant will have less color and be blacker. That way they recede back into the frame. So here's an example of me just laying down some background color in the first frame, okay? So all I did was just gradate the background from some blue in the lower right side up to black in the upper left side, okay? Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a lighter color, let's say something like a yellow or an orange, or yellow and an orange. And I'm just going to draw something in here real quick, okay? So let's just say that I draw a 3-dimensional square, a cube, okay? So I wireframe it in first. So it looks something like that, okay? Then I'm going to determine where my light source is from. Where is my light source? I'm going to say that my light source is coming from the right. That means all the things that are facing to the right should be lighter than the things that are on the left. The left is further away from the light source, so it's going to be darker. Things that are closer to the light source are going to be lighter, okay? So I'm going to just quickly pencil in some of the faces of that cube. Okay, and you should be able to start to see that things will start to pop in terms of their overall exposure to the light source. The things that are facing the right are lighter. The things that are further from the light source, in other words, the things on the left, are going to be darker. And then to really punch that up, I'll take my straight edge, my triangle here, triangle like this, and I'll really punch the edges that are catching the light source, okay? So I will really pop those areas where I want to get really a sense that they're in the foreground and that they're receiving the most light. And then you can start to see that there's going to be the side that is closest to the camera and closest to the light source is going to have a lighter color, and the areas that are farther away are going to have darker colors, okay? Then the final thing I'll do is I'll resort back to a darker color, like let's say a dark green color like this. And what I'll do is I'll drop in a shadow so that that will further separate it from the background. And that'll create the sense that the object is kind of floating in space, which you can see there. See that? All of that is determined by, first of all, what does the object look like? Second of all, where is my light source? Is my light source over on the right side of frame? Or is my light source down in the lower left of frame? And if that light source is coming from the bottom, then all of my shadows should be cast to the right. And the objects closest to the light source should be lighter. And all the objects further from the light source should be darker. That'll give a sense of three-dimensional space, okay? So that's really, really important in being able to draw these color storyboards. Okay? I'm not going to draw an entire storyboard because we've only got about 15 minutes. But I'm going to go ahead and tighten this up a little bit and see what I can do to get it even rendered a little bit better. So I'm coming back with my straight edge, and I'm just kind of tightening up things based on my light source and the color of my object. Okay? And then once again, I'm coming back maybe with a little bit of a darker color to just kind of darken up some edges and make some of the corners pop a little bit. And then you can just see how the object is starting to become much more three-dimensional and kind of sitting in space there a little bit. You guys see that? There you go. So that's generally what you want to do in color storyboarding, is you want to take your wireframe object, you want to take your black and white storyboard, and you want to start adding color with the understanding that objects that are lighter are going to be closer to the light source. Objects darker are going to be further from the light source. Okay? And then you can always use shadows to accentuate that light source. Is that light source, am I out on a cloudy day today, which is called ambient light? Thereby the shadows will be soft. They won't be hard. Or do I have a flashlight? And if the flashlight is shining on the object, then there's a high likelihood that it is going to cast a hard shadow, very sharp, hard shadow. As a result, you can tell a lot about the environment that the animator needs to animate in by being able to show in color keyframes what kind of lighting there is, what kind of textures the objects have, what kind of qualities the light source has. Is it close to the camera? Is it far from the camera? Is it wide ambient light, or is it specular flashlight kind of a light? Okay, all of this is very, very important to the animation team as you get ready to move into motion testing and finally into color rendering. Okay, so with that, Scott, I want to introduce the kids just to one last area in animation. Actually, two areas. The first one is dealing with what we call interactive graphics. These are graphics that are on your TV set that you interact with your remote control. So you use your remote control to interact with parts of the screen, and that allows you to go to more things. You notice this in all of your streaming services. So you guys take a break from your drawing and take a look at this animation really quick, okay? Let's move on to there you go. Take a look. So notice how the highlight is moving down the selectable items, and then you select one, and there's a transition. These are all parts of animation for interactive television, okay? So you have to call up the menu, and then you've got to select along that menu, all done by animation. So I'm going to let it play one more time and take a look at the way that these objects come onto the screen and then how you interact with them by moving your highlight up and down the screen and then selecting items. And then transitioning to what you can do in those items, okay? And then transitioning out of them. Okay, all of this is another area of animation, in particular computer graphics, that's important for you guys to know, all right? It's another area of animation that you may not have known of before. Before, you always thought all animation involved characters and didn't involve graphics. Well, there's a whole area of animation called computer graphics, and that's what I'm demonstrating here. The last one is, believe it or not, even your computer screen has animation on it. Oftentimes when you're dealing with your iPad or you're dealing with your computer or even your phone, you may pay attention, and you should pay attention, to the animations that are involved in those kinds of things. So let me show you an animation for a company called Lenovo, which is a computer company. They make laptop computers. And they asked me to design an interface for them. So all of these animations are important, okay, to describe what happens in a particular part of your interface. Okay, what happens when I select an item? Well, the sub items come up, and then I can select on one of the sub items, and then I can go back and decide to select on one of the main items. Okay, let's play that again. So here I call up the menu. The menu comes on with an animation. I move across the selectable items. Then I'm going to select one. Okay, I'm going to select the Explorer. It's going to bring up Google. Then I'm going to call up the main menu again. I'm going to scroll through it, select an item, and then look at the sub items. What are the sub items in the category of? I can't quite see what that is, but it's something that you've selected, and then there were sub items in that. Okay. All right. So with that, I'm gonna have this is gonna conclude our whole month of July. The whole month of July was dedicated to broadcast graphics and computer animation. So I'm gonna go back and play for you my demonstration reel called a demo reel. And that shows all of, or a collection of the animations that I've done over my career. And I want you guys to put down your pencils, put down your stylus, and watch this. It'll take 3 minutes. You can spare 3 minutes of your life to watch this demo reel from the beginning to the end. Scott, go ahead. Great, thank you, Scott. Great. So guys, I think you've, over the course of the entire month of July on Thursdays, you've had a chance to see how some of the graphics that you see on TV, and you probably don't even pay attention to, how was that done? How did they do that? Well, now you're going to be looking at TV and you're going to know how all those things are done. And believe me, they're not easy. They may only last a couple seconds, but it probably took months to create. Probably took a long time to create some of those graphics that you see every day, okay? So with that, we're gonna wind down the month and wind down this class. Does anybody have any questions, or does anybody wanna share? Anybody wanna share something? Who would like to share? Tate, you wanna share anything? Liliana, Heather? Any of you guys wanna share? You don't have to share. Don't feel compelled to share. You don't have to. How about any questions? You guys have any questions you want to ask? If so, unmute your mic. No? All right, guys, just want to remind you that Chuck Jones Center for Creativity is a free service. We appreciate any donations. Hope you've learned something you like, and invite your friends. Tell your friends about this. Say, guys, just come on, it's free. Check it out. See what's up on television graphics or animation or drawing, any of those things, or acting. All right, guys, if you don't have any questions, I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. I don't know when that'll be, but I'll be back and let you guys teach you guys something new again. All right? Thanks a lot, you guys. Take care.
Perfect. Thank you, Boogie. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.